Okay, so we've got Cloudy Peak, which sits right in the centre there, that we can see through the trees. And of course, that sits between the Havelock and the Clyde rivers. And together they form the Rangitata that flows from my left out to the right down here. And then from Cloudy Peak, if we move to the right, we see the highest peak there is known as Mount Potts.
Yep.
So you'd come to New Zealand, you might be penniless, but so long as you could hold a gun and hold your own, you might end up with a title somewhere, which was kind of like your reward. But Samuel Butler was a little bit different because he did have finance. But the problem was the land was pretty much already taken, so he had to bide his time. And that's how he came to be at Butler Creek. And then from Mount Potts, we can see the Arrowsmith Range, or the initial part of the Arrowsmith Range out through the centre. Where Samuel Butler first arrived was within the Ackland property on the Bear McLeod Range, in an area that we now know as Butler Creek. And right next door, of course, is this area that we recognise as Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was never part of the Ackland Run, it was always separate. And of course the issue for Butler is that when he arrived in this area, he did have funds, but he couldn't secure a title. And so he sought a solution, and in discussions with Ackland, they were quite keen to have somebody at the northern end to serve as a boundary keeper. So an agreement was reached, and Ackland's gifted 20 acres to Samuel Butler on the condition that he reside there. And in effect, he became a boundary keeper to the Ackland Run for a couple of years. And that's where he constructed his V-hut. When Samuel Butler first arrived at that site, it did look different to what it does today. The Butler Creek today has a shingle bed and doesn't look too different to any other stream, but in actual fact, when Butler was first here, it would have looked more like a babbling brook. It would have been tussock right to the edge, and so there hadn't been that degree of erosion in the backcountry to the same extent. Forest Creek may have been a little bit different. There would have been more terraces on Forest Creek bed, but equally there would have been the initial stages of a gravel run through there. So even over 100 years, these areas do gradually change a little bit. And the other thing that we know from those early times is that the vegetative cover was quite dense, and so there was a lot of tussock and that sort of thing about. And so there was a lot of natural fertility for Butler to run some sheep. He was allowed, obviously, to utilise the 20 acres that he was on, but he was also expected to use the true left of Forest Creek, which was across the river. So he wasn't actually grazing Ackland land, he was effectively grazing unclaimed land further in that would have been out of the way of the other landowners. So initially there would have been a good feed supply for him to run a small number of sheep. And then, of course, as we've seen with other settlers, eventually they resorted to more burning to bring back fresh growth, because, of course, in those days they didn't have superphosphates and things like that. And then we come out onto here, and to the right here, this particular mountain here is extremely significant in the South Island. So we generally know it as Mount Harper. And of course the Harpers were early settler family. But what is less known is that mountain there is regarded and falls under the jurisdiction, if you like, of iwi near Ashburton. And they know that as Maui's canoe. Now that particular peak is considered to be, by iwi, the centre of the South Island. And one of the things that I questioned Maori about was, why did you refer to Mount Harper as Maui's canoe? And they said because it's in the centre of the South Island. And it just shows the technical know-how, if you like, of Maori, because one of the families that have lived in this region for a long time, one of the boys went and worked for Lands and Survey Department up in Wellington, and they undertook this exercise one day because these people have to be very good at survey skill. And the question is simple: whereabouts is the centre of the South Island? And he was very excited to learn that it was actually on his father's farm. And so the very centre of the South Island sits just over here a little bit. And so if you go from north to south, from east to west, we are right in the centre of the South Island. And so it is no coincidence that Mount Harper is known by iwi as Maui's canoe. And it shows the level of technical know-how that they had to have assessed that. And so we shouldn't underestimate the ability of early explorers, their ability to read stars, their ability to navigate. And I think that's testament to that. The early settlers were great explorers, no doubt about that. For Samuel Butler, I'm not suggesting for a moment that he wasn't a great explorer. He certainly was. And equally, in that region that he settled of Butler Creek, I think he was very much the first to really get to know that area intimately, and certainly was the first person to write about that particular location. And he had that wonderful gift with his writing. And of course he's a gifted musician, because we know that he was very good on the piano too. And for example, when he went to visit not only the Aclands but the Tripps, they made record of the fact of Samuel Butler playing their piano in the Tripp homestead. So he was gifted in those respects. So his intimate recollections of Forest Creek, and in particular Neutral Creek, where he likened the sides of Neutral Creek to, I think it was Vienna or somewhere like that in his writing. So he had that wonderful, if you like, theatrical kind of outlook that I think was not necessarily that common amongst early settlers. So yeah, he certainly was possibly more gifted as an explorer than a sheep farmer, I don't know. And then down at the bottom end of the Rangitata is the Rangitata Gorge. And what we know about that geologically is that at one stage they did a cross-sectional mapping of the South Island, if you like, an X-ray of the backbone of the Southern Alps. And part of what they were looking for was to try and understand why there aren't more earthquakes in New Zealand. And in very simple terms, they worked out that one of the features is our very, very high rainfall, and in some respects it's almost like it's lubricating the Southern Alps. So we're not getting these tremendous jolts because there's a lot of forces at work in the Southern Alps of New Zealand, and so that was the conclusion. And the good thing from our perspective as New Zealanders is that he was able to provide a very early record, not only of New Zealand, but of this unique place, the New Zealand South Island High Country. And so his account was a very early account of this new land that had been discovered way down in the South Pacific. And for that purpose, I think his writings and his verbal accounts were keenly listened to, keenly sought after. And so in that sense, I think Butler's done the nation of New Zealand proud, and had the skills and the gift to convey what he saw and what he learnt. Even though he may have only been in New Zealand for a relatively short period of time, he was able to give a solid account, if you like, of high country life back in Britain. And then if we move along, we see the main Ben McLeod Range. And the Ben McLeod Range, if you like, is my version of the Remarkable Range. It's a little bit similar, but the unique thing about the Ben McLeod Range, it's one of the few mountain ranges in the South Island High Country that does run east-west, because just about all the other ranges run north-south. And from my perspective, one of the advantages of the Ben McLeod Range running east-west is that it's winter safe. And so if you have stock grazing on those sunny faces, then they're far less likely to be smothered in the snowstorms. And so that's, if you like, the 360-degree tour.